If you want to know the secrets of existence and the true meaning of life, I can't help you. But if you want some book recommendations, why not try reading the ones I wrote? If you're a fan of giant monster mayhem and anime weirdness, why not try Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1? If horror is more your style, you can't go wrong with The Occult Mafia. Those who enjoy their fantasy with a dark twist may be interested in Emerald of Maddox City. And if you're interested in shared universes, why not read all three? Hop on down to the description for links to all three books on Amazon. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video.
You getting plenty of rest, Dynamite? You mind if I sit beside you and make another video? Yeah, I think you'd be okay with that. You've been okay with it every other time. Alright, you just keep lying there and looking cute, and I'll do what I do. Deal? Deal. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the Omni viewer, and I'm going to do something today that I don't normally do on this channel. I'm going to do, 1, a direct response to a video I've seen elsewhere, and 2, make that response in an actual timely manner, because it just went up. The video in question is a recent one by the channel Nerdstalgic, which is about the one major problem with modern movie monsters, or modern Hollywood monsters, if you will. Not all of them are in movies. I watched the whole video through to the end. It's interesting, it makes some good points, and yet I feel that there are two things that need addressing. One of those things is a detail that Nerdstalgic glosses over, but which I think really needs further addressing because he kind of got that detail wrong. And the other is something which Nerdstalgic doesn't really take into account when making this case, because if it were brought into account, it would make the entire argument far less definitive than it's currently worded. So, I'm going to address these things my own way. So the main thrust of the video is that the main problem with current Hollywood monsters is a vast amount of shared traits. If you were to line, say, the Demogorgon from Stranger Things, the White Spikes from the Tomorrow War, the Mutos from Godzilla 2014, and the Cloverfield monster, you'd see a lot of similarities between all four of them, despite being from completely different works. Very long, spindly limbs, not very human proportions, very pale skin on at least 3 of them, big mouths that open up to reveal nasty, gnarly teeth, things like that. You can see in those 4 monsters, and in a whole bunch of others that have come out recently, a lot of those shared traits. And the reason he gives for this is because, 1, you have a lot of design teams that are working in the same space but on vastly different projects, and so they're seeing a lot of each other's work and therefore consciously or unconsciously incorporating what they've seen elsewhere into their own designs, and also because the tools currently being used to make these creatures are basically the digital tools that can get them done quickly and in time for a big production where the deadline is looming. And as a result of using these very quick and efficient tools, you don't have as much time to take a pencil and paper and really take your time in coming up with something wholly original. Now, it also just occurs to me, having said that, that I don't quite agree with the idea that the tools are the problem. Now, I suppose the tools could be part of the issue, but technically, a tool is just a tool. What matters is how the person uses it. A hammer by itself is just a hammer. It sits there. It does nothing. It depends on who picks it up, what it's used for, whether it's to drive a nail into a piece of wood or bash somebody's head in. Obviously, one of those is a more constructive use of the tool, but that's just a side point. The implication that's outright stated, in fact, it's more than just implied, that Nerdstalgic makes here is that when you're using the modern methods of creature design, it somehow withdraws creativity than when you used the older designs. And he specifically says, well, he makes the back in the old days it was better argument. saying that when you're using stop-motion armatures and rubber suits and you're working with pen and paper on your designs, that frees you up to get more creative and figure out more and different and newer ways to realize a unique creature. And this is where he glosses over something. He cites the Xenomorph from Alien as one of the most iconic movie monsters ever, and then states that, yes, there were a lot of Alien ripoffs that came out after that, but the reason they all failed was because none of them had H.R. Giger working on their films. It has nothing to do with the fact that the designs were just being stolen and copied. Honestly, it's kind of romanticizing the old ways. I love the way that movies used to be made, especially when it came to special effects. But to say that the whole creature design thing is a new problem, which is basically what Nerdstalgic is saying, he's saying this is a modern issue, that's just plain wrong. And you can't just sort of pay lip service to it and then say, oh, but that's because they didn't have such and such an element. You're still acknowledging that there were copies being made of something iconic well before this modern age of movie monsters. And in fact, we can go back even further than Alien. Let's go back to the 1930s. Some of the most iconic movie monsters of all time appeared in the 1930s. How many giant ape monsters appeared after King Kong? Monsters that were just really big apes. Mighty Joe Young, Conga, the like. Heck, there's a movie called Unknown Island where the monsters on the island are T-Rexes and supposedly giant ground sloths, but here's an image. Those giant ground sloths look an awful lot like giant gorillas, don't they? And that was in the 1940s, when King Kong had firmly cemented himself in people's minds as one of the iconic giant movie monsters. That's an example of how an iconic design appeared and then everybody else wanted a piece of that. Or heck, we can even see it in creatures that are perhaps a bit less intricately designed. Look in Universal. Dracula. How many vampires that have appeared since 1931 just take some sort of elements from how Bela Lugosi depicted the Count? Can we even quantify that number? And Lugosi's Dracula isn't necessarily an overly designed character. He's got sharp aquiline features, which is just how Bela looked, and he dressed in very fine attire, with a cape sometimes, but that's become like the definitive vampire look. That's what people picture these days when you say, think of a vampire. You picture Bela Lugosi's Dracula. And regardless of the medium, whether it was other movies or TV shows or comic books or regular books or video games or what have you, people always somehow default back to that Dracula. So I don't think this is a new problem at all. The idea that creatures from a particular era of filmmaking and TV making and storytelling in general can all share similar traits is not a modern problem. It's existed for as long as storytelling has practically existed itself, specifically with film. You have this idea that when somebody comes up with an idea, an iconic look particularly, that works, other people are gonna copy it. That's just the way it goes. You can say it for how there were a bunch of giant gorilla creatures after King Kong, a bunch of sharply dressed vampires after Dracula, a bunch of really hairy dudes with an underbite representing werewolves after the Wolfman, a bunch of giant reptile creatures representing the atomic bomb after the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and Godzilla, and of course insects as well. There were a ton of those. That's just the way it goes. Yes, there's a lot of, if you'll pardon the term, incest when it comes to creature design in entertainment, particularly in Hollywood, but it's not a modern problem, as Nerdstalgic says. What we're seeing in the modern day isn't so much a new problem as it is the latest variation of something that's always been there. Yes, we can see a lot of similarities between these spindly-limbed, lithe-bodied, toothy-mawed creatures of the modern day. That's just the latest trend. That's what is currently popular as a creature design, especially if you're going for something that's really meant to look alien and strange. But it's not a new issue. If it even is an issue, it's really just a trend when you get right down to it. And then there's the part which the Nerdstalgic video honestly just plain misses. Now, when you're looking at this whole thing purely from a design perspective, the video is completely true. There are a lot of similarities to be found amongst all the different creatures of the modern day, particularly when they're realized with CGI. Pale skin, long spindly limbs, big toothy mouths, sometimes the whole head splits open to reveal these rows and rows of teeth. There's commonality amongst all of these things. And if you look at it purely from a design perspective, you can say, yeah, entertainment these days has just become creatively bankrupt. They're all just stealing from each other until the point where nobody can tell who came up with it first anymore. But what's missing from this whole discussion is the idea of execution. The monsters may all look similar, sure, but what role do they play in the story? And when you take that into account, can you really say that the design thing is that big of an issue? For the sake of argument, we'll use two of the creatures that Nerdstalgic directly references in the video. The Demogorgon from Stranger Things and the White Spike from the Tomorrow War. Again, similar designs. Pale skin, spindly limbs, toothy mouths, alien proportions, things like that. You could say that they share some blood, if you will, but what roles do these creatures play in their respective stories? Well, let's take a look. In the Tomorrow War, the White Spikes are just a ravenous plague. They spread like wildfire. They are always charging forward, attacking everything they see. They are unstoppable. They do not try to hide. They will just come at you, and it doesn't matter what you do, they will come at you until you are finished, or until you get a lucky shot in, if that even happens. They charge, always advancing, always on the attack, always the powerful aggressor. But the Demogorgon, very different. The Demogorgon is sneaky. It lurks in the shadows. It waits, biding its time, stalking its prey, staying just out of sight, and by the time you realize it's even there, it's already got you. It's a far more insidious, far more quiet and stealthy sort of creature. And therefore, it works in a very different way. It's got a menace that's more likely to get under your skin. Seeing something like a White Spike charging at you is terrifying in one way, but knowing that something like a Demogorgon could be stalking you and you'd never know it is terrifying in a very different way. They may look similar, they may share a few traits, but the roles they play in their respective stories are very different. And that's the thing. You can have a trend where a particular design becomes popular and everyone comes up with variations of it, but it's what they do with those variations that matters. You can have a base idea for, say, a giant reptilian monster. That's a tale that's very old. We have dragon mythology from all over the world going all the way back. It's pretty common. The base idea of the giant reptilian monster is nothing new. But what role does it play in the story? Is it a mindless creature, or is it intelligent? Or is it maybe ambiguous just how intelligent it might be? Is it malevolent, or is it benevolent? Is it large? Is it small? How does it interact with its environment? What sort of abilities does it have, if it has any abilities? Is it based on something from the natural world, or is it something completely alien? Is it a dragon, or is it a dinosaur, or is it a modern lizard? there are all sorts of variations you can come up with, and those variations affect how the story is told. Unless, of course, you take the Nerdstalgic video at face value and say that if you just have a trend where there are a bunch of giant reptilian monsters stomping around in different movies, that's just bad because it's unoriginal and all people can think about is giant lizards these days, and it wasn't like in the old days when we had more variety of monsters, even though there were plenty of stolen designs from the past as well, but that's just a different issue entirely, and it's not the same as what we're talking about today. I don't know if I'm coming across as a little bit abrasive. I don't mean any hostility towards Nerdstalgic. Like I said, in basic concept, he's right to say that there is a current trend in entertainment where a particular look for monsters is prevalent, and we're seeing a lot of variations of it. I just feel that the video was so intent on presenting one perspective and having it be the definitive perspective that it ignored a few things, and even got a couple of things not quite right, and thus I feel those issues needed to be addressed. Now, of course, we have to take those into account, and the conversation can move forward in a much better way. That was my intent here. I wanted to bring up some things that the initial video didn't really address. And hopefully, in addressing them, we can have a better understanding of what motivates modern creature design in the entertainment industry, and what to do about it, if indeed there's anything to do about it. Like I said, it's a trend. Trends come and go. Some of them stick around for a long time. Some of them never really die. But it's ultimately still just a trend. And at some point, we'll be seeing a new trend pop up when it comes to monsters. And that new trend, well, I don't know what it will be, but it will start with one particularly popular design, and then we'll see a whole bunch of variations of it, and before you know it, there'll be a whole new breed of movie monsters with similar traits of a very different sort from what we're seeing today. And the whole cycle will start over again. Such is the way of it. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.
If you enjoyed what you just saw, hop on down to the description for links to Patreon, DeviantArt, and all of our social media, as well as links for Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, and Emerald of Maddox City, 3 original novels I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.